speaker tonight is Carl Wiedemann. He's been a long-time director of our organization. Carl initiated our twice-a-year newsletter and researches all of those interesting articles in the newsletter. Tonight he has presented his research on W.W. Christman and the Christmas Sanctuary. Carl?
Okay. Tonight I'm going to tell you about what I know about the Christmas Sanctuary. And I thought 2 years ago, when Shirley was putting together the programs, I was scheduled. But then along came COVID, so I had another year to do research. And then last year, we didn't have any meetings, so I had another year to do research. So by the time I got done with all my research, I learned a lot about the start of the Christmas Sanctuary, and I'm going to share that with you tonight. So let me start by asking, how many people have been to the Christmas Sanctuary? Could you just raise your hand? Just about everybody. And of course you know then who Will Christman is. You don't know who Will Christman is? W.W. Christman.
Well, I think he willed it or something.
All right, that's good. I was just curious. So how many people would say, yeah, I kind of know what his connection is? All right. And how about the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club? How many people are familiar with that? There's a couple here. And how about Vincent Schaefer? Have you heard of Vincent Schaefer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, a lot of people have heard of Vincent Schaefer. That's good. Well, anyway, that's what we're going to talk about. I was just curious to see, how deep is the knowledge of the Christmas Sanctuary. And with that, I'm going to see if this is going to work. So everybody can see. All right. This is going to work. All right. Okay, we have in Duanesburg, we have 4 public natural areas. The town forest, which a lot of people might not know where that is, but it's behind the county forest. And there's a state forest, Featherston Hall, and the Christmas Sanctuary. And of those four, Christman is the most popular. And that's because it's scenic. You've got the Bosenkill that runs down through it. You've got easy access because the parking lot is pretty close. You can walk over there, and there are marked trails. It's well known, as all the hands around here showed. People know, I've heard about it. It's been open for 90 years to the public. It's associated with Will Christman, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. So here, when you get to the parking lot, which isn't that big, and is usually filled with cars, and when we drove by tonight, there was one car there, even though it's late. There's a map of the trails. And when you walk down there, as long as it's been raining, you will see its beauty. And it's a great place for younger people because there's always things to find and a lot of nature there. This is a shot of the lean-to and the falls, which is probably the heart of the sanctuary. And this is another shot of the falls. Sound effects.
Glad it wasn't you.
And some of the scenes you might see if you go down to the Christman and take a walk through the trails. So, the sanctuary was once part of the Williams Hollow Farm. And the Williams Hollow Farm is what the Christman family, that's their family farm. And they called it the Williams Hollow Farm. And this is a picture of William Weaver Christman, who's the farmer poet, W.W. Christman, or Will Christman. These are his parents, Spencer and Nancy. They moved to Duanesburg about 1850. They came from Montgomery County, from the town of Root. And I don't really know, I mean, he was a farmer, and I think he started with a lease, and then he bought that farm. And they had 4 kids. But if you look at the dates, you can see Henry, Ambrose, Carolyn, and William. William is the only one. William was kind of last, and there's a gap there. But you can see Henry died the year William was born. Ambrose died when he was 5, and his sister Carolyn died when he was, 12, something like that. So they all, and I think it was tuberculosis, I'm not exactly sure. But in other words, it came down to, he was an only child, really, as he was growing up. And he married the girl next door, Catherine Bratt. It says adjoining farm. So they got married in 1887, and they had 9 kids. So you can see the house was filled at one point, and you can see those kids, like they're every 2 years. There's another Christman. So it must have been, well, anyway, they're used to having a lot of people around, and I was also thinking about that, if that's sort of influenced the way. It's hard to know people, after 100 years or 200 years, and you're trying to get clues as to what was their personality, what were they like. So I think some of those things are interesting to speculate or think about. Well, one of the things about Will Christman, when he's growing up down there, that's on Schoharie Turnpike, he only went to school. He went to the, I think it's Weaver Road School. He went 3 winters. And this is from Carl Karmer, who's a historian writer. He says, 3 winters in a one-room academy was the best schooling the Helder Hill country offered. Will took it and never forgave its shortcomings. Thanks to a grandmother with a love of words, the boy had read all of Shakespeare by the time he was 12, and reading everything else he could get his hands on, especially poetry. So that gives you an idea that Will Christman is a pretty smart guy. He goes to school for 3 years, and then he reads all of Shakespeare, if that's the case. Well, he never forgot that experience of that one-room school, which he really thought was a disservice to rural people, farmers, and everybody who lived in the country. So he wrote to the newspaper regularly about issues that he felt strongly about, and this was one of them, education. So I grieve a little every year when 5,000 or 6,000 one-room schools in the Empire State reopen to receive their quota of 2 or 3 or 4 unfortunate pupils. Too few for games, unless it's solitaire, and too few to spur impressionable youth to friendly rivalry. I visualize the cheap, bare buildings towing the road, just as they did 60 years ago when I got my education. Many without a playground, without a fringe of green grass around, without even a tree on which the forlorn and discouraged teacher may hang herself. And this is what he told. This is again from Carl Karmer. But Will Christman, if you think about it, he's born in 1865, and he's working with his father on the farm, and by 1890 or so, farming, these hill farms in New York State were getting harder and harder to make a living on. And that just got worse as time went on. I think during the 20s it was, that's the time of farm abandonment from like 1870, 80, 90 through the Depression. Like half of the farmland anyway went back to trees or was just abandoned because you couldn't make a living on these shallow soils that didn't have a long growing season, and there's farms all across New York State that were just abandoned. So he says, Will said that his farm stood on edge and he tilled both sides. My hill land is so cold and lean, it's the last to put on green. In winter, the first to put on snow. In spring, the last to let it go. And when he was 60, or nearly 60, he decided he would only till one side of that hill. And so he cut down, this was a 100-acre farm or 110 acres. He cut it down to 25 acres, and that's what he worked. And he began planting pines, which he says these are on the slopes that he helped his father clear, and my father would be shocked if he knew what I was doing. So that gives you an idea, that, well, he's thinking, I'm not going to be able to grow crops here. I might as well grow trees. So when he wasn't, as he's backed off or semi-retired, I guess, from farming, he started getting more serious about writing poetry. He had always written. One of the things I did was search newspapers, so you can put W.W. Christman, and all of a sudden all these letters to the editor show up. I mean, I must have 70 letters to the editor about all these subjects that he felt strongly about. But besides letters to the editor, he's writing poetry, and he did 4 books of poetry from 1926 to 1937. And the one that he wrote, The Wild Pasture Pine, won the John Burroughs Award, which was a big deal for a poet. And that really put him on the map. I mean, I think he was known locally or regionally as the farmer poet of Duanesburg, but now he's the award-winning poet. Nuts. What did I do? And let's see, that was 34. In 37, he had a heart attack and he died on the farm. And you can see, this is the obit in the New York Times. So that shows that he had some notoriety. And they talk about him as a farmer who was a poet, and he urged school reform. That's what he's known for. At least that was the headline in the New York Times. And here's what the Knickerbocker Press said. One of the most gracious of men, his somewhat gnarled form and a face showing the impact of close communion with the elements, greeted visitors with a gentleness that came from the inner man. Largely self-educated, he knew intimately the best that men's minds had created in literature. He won and had the respect of others as fine in their several ways as himself. He interested himself continually in current events, offering mature, thoughtful, or humorous comment as the occasion demanded through letters and articles. After plodding behind the plow on his hilly acres, and after raising a family, he started refining a lifelong series of experiences into the poems that will remain his permanent contribution to literature. So Catherine, his widow, she says she's also a naturalist and someone who loves the birds and knows the wildflowers. She's noted for the gardens that she had, and this is a shot of her in one of the flower gardens. And Will had started planting trees on those hilly acres that he wasn't farming, and she's very happy to go right ahead and keep on planting trees on the farm. So that brings me to Vincent Schaefer. He's the guy who proposed, this is my interpretation after reading all these articles in the papers about the sanctuary. He's the guy who proposed the Christman sanctuary to Will and Catherine Christman. He was born in 1906 in Schenectady, and he was the eldest. He left high school at 15 because his parents were, I guess, they needed financial support, he felt, and he wanted to help the family. So he starts as a drill press operator at General Electric. Later, he transferred to the R&D Center as a machinist, and he worked for one of the scientists there. And later, he was through reading a lot of books and being mentored by the senior scientist there. He became a research scientist for GE. And he said, I spent 20 years at Langmuir University. Well, Langmuir University is Irving Langmuir. That's his mentor. And Irving liked Vincent and vice versa. Those two guys clicked. And he apparently would tell Vincent, take this chemistry book home this weekend and read it, and you'll understand what we're doing over here and over there. And Irving Langmuir won the Nobel Prize in 1932 for chemistry. So he was also a very accomplished scientists. So Vincent Schaefer, he discovered cloud seeding. And he's the guy, when he passed away, the New York Times said, he was hailed as the first person to actually do something about the weather, not just talk about it. He was the one, if you drive down Route 30 and you go by Vroman's Nose, and you stop and take a look at that historic marker, it talks about the smoke generator that was trialed down there on the top of Vroman's Nose during World War II. And Vincent Schaefer was one of the guys who invented that. And that was used extensively in the war. And General Electric made a big deal about Vincent Schaefer because he started as a drill press operator, and now he's a research scientist, a very accomplished guy who's got, I think he had 14 patents. He's a very smart person. And so they publicized his sort of Horatio Alger story. You know, these are the kinds of people, GE is saying, that work for our company. They're brilliant people who can do anything. So he was certainly celebrated there. Well, he didn't stay with GE forever. He went on to become the first director, founded and became the first director of the Atmospheric Sciences Research Center at SUNY Albany. And this is one of the books. He's written several books, but this one is about the atmosphere, Vincent J. Schaefer. So let's go back to when Vincent was in his 20s. In his 20s, he organized and led the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, and that's 1929. He proposed a hiking trail from New York City to Whiteface, which he called the Long Path. He organized and led a chapter of the New York State Archaeological Association in 1931, and that's because he was interested as a scout. He had been active in scouting, and he was really curious about arrowheads and native people, and learned all about where they lived around here, and wrote a paper about that too. But he was the leader of, or formed this chapter of the Archaeological Association. And he organized and led the Schenectady Winter Sports Club in 1932. The Winter Sports Club is still active, I understand. But let's talk about the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, which he and his brother Paul, I think, they must have gone out hiking. He was 23, I think, in 1929. So they must have done this on the weekends, that they and their friends would go someplace and do hikes. And they decided, or Vincent decided, that we should form a club. So what happened was they organized what they call the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, and it was to create this, as he said, a closer band of friendship between local nature and sports enthusiasts, and to conduct a series of outdoor activities throughout the year. Among the organizers are Vincent Schaefer, amateur archaeologist, naturalist, and director of the Adirondack Trail Camp of the Schenectady Boy Scouts. So you can see he's got a lot of interests. And Vincent writes that this club they pledged themselves to the preservation and protection of the woods and streams and inhabitants thereof. So it's not just that he wants to have a group of hikers and go out and hike around. It's also conservation. And what I guess today it would be called an ecological or environmental group. So the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club was more than just a hiking club. And here's one of their first. They were formed in 1929 in January. So in March, in the paper, it talks about one of their expeditions. They're going to have a bus leaving Erie Boulevard that's going to take them up to Altamont, probably. And then they're going to walk up the Bozenkill and explore it. Now, I don't know what happened on that particular outing, but if you walk up the Bozenkill from Altamont, where you end up? You end up at Will Christman's farm. And you can see in 1930, now that was March 1929, 1930, in the middle there, the Cobleskill Index, it says Ray Proxmire, Al Getz, Vincent Schaefer, and Paul Schaefer of Schenectady were Wednesday evening guests of the Christmans. And then if you go the next month, it's his sister Gertrude along with Paul, his brother, and other members of the club, and they also they walk up the Bozenkill to the Christmans, and they are Sunday evening guests of the Christmans. So you can see the Christmans are really welcoming these people from Schenectady who are members of this hiking club. And then if you go to November of that year, you can see that they're having a big winter outing in the Williams Hollow Farm, or at the Williams Hollow Farm, and they're going to be having their snow festival. They do a lot of stuff at the Williams Hollow Farm. And so you can see that is getting to be a pretty tight group. And they reciprocate by electing Will Christman an honorary member of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. And you see it says he was elected, and members of the club who have visited him have found him to be an enthusiastic follower of the Long Brown Path. I don't know if you know about the Long Brown Path, but you notice Vincent talked about he wanted to have the long path. Well, that's a poem, and I don't know if I got this right. Yeah, here it is. That's a poem by Walt Whitman about. He starts this poem about afoot and lighthearted. I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me, the long brown path before me, leading wherever I chose. That sentiment, that freedom, the feeling of, hey, I can just hit the road, I'm going to walk, and I can go in any direction because I'm just feeling like total freedom. And I think that appealed to Vincent Schaefer because his idea of that long path that was going to go all the way up from New York up to the Adirondacks, it wasn't exactly a trail. It was supposed to be an experience. So he had it kind of mapped out and things to see along the way, but there was no real trail. It was supposed to be an adventure that you took off and you just walked the long path. And I think that the same thing with Will Christman. Walt Whitman was his favorite, or one of his favorite poets. I think his favorite book was, he had gotten a book from Walt Whitman that was autographed to him, and he loved Walt Whitman. So those two, Vincent Schaefer and Will Christman, they both like this guy, and that's where you see the reference to the long brown path, and how Will Christman has the right attitude. So this is Carl Carmer again describing Will Christman. His friends remember him sitting at the head of a long table lined with children and guests. There were always extra places for droppers in, a pencil in his hand, a sheet of paper below it, jotting down lines of verse while good talk and laughter flowed around him. And this is one of the outings of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. If you count up the number of people there, there's 35 people, and they're all in. They're over the kitchen stove. They made their coffee and prepared hot dogs and sauerkraut. So again, it's another illustration of how the Christmans were so welcoming. And this, to have 35 people in that house, that's not a big house, I don't think. It must have been pretty crowded. So 1930, this is a piece in the paper in the Cobleskill Index written by Lansing. And Lansing, remember, is living there at the house with his parents. And he writes for the Index and the Altamont Enterprise. So whenever you read one of those articles, its chances are very good that it's been written by Lansing Christman. This one is signed by Lansing Christman. And he basically is saying here that, his father's talking with this hiking club and considering forming this sanctuary. And then a month later, the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club is having their meeting. They're moving ahead on this idea of having a wildlife sanctuary at the Christman's farm. They've already put up feeding stations, and they're going to do more. And then the next article in April, they're saying that the Christman sanctuary founded. They're going to make a wildlife sanctuary there. So by that time, apparently Will said, yeah, let's do this. So they plant 7,000 trees and on the farm. This is the members of the Mohawk Hiking Club. And then in May, they decide they're going to call it the Christman Sanctuary. I mean, they could have called it the Williams Hollow Sanctuary, or they could have called it the Bozenkill Sanctuary, But the club decided, we're going to call this the Christmas Sanctuary in recognition of the Christmans. And Vincent writes about how this happened. The love of nature established a bond between the hikers and the hard-working, self-taught man, his wife, and large family, so that members of the club were extended an invitation to camp along the picturesque stream. In 1931, the farm, consisting of over 100 acres, was set aside as a wildlife sanctuary with appropriate ceremony, and a bronze tablet unveiled by the hiking club. They made a plaque, and they put it in the front yard, and it's still there. If you drive by Schoharie Turnpike, you'll see it. And if you look closely at the plaque, you will see it's dedicated to the Christmans, 1931, by the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. They had about 100 people that showed up for the dedication. So even then, it was well received or well known. And these are some of the things that the club did. They put birds out, Hungarian grouse and snowshoe rabbits. And this was written by Vincent, and he says the hikers are spreading the creed of conservation at the same time they're practicing it. They planted a lot of trees out there. I don't know how many acres are now planted, but Will Christman started planting about 1922, and then when they had this relationship, came together with the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, from then on, it was the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club planting trees. So they planted quite a few trees because they had a lot of members. They probably planted most of the trees on the Christmas Sanctuary. And they also did work on this, or built this lean-to, which is called the Helder Hills Lean-to, which is still there. That goes from, I think it was finished or dedicated in 1934. And this is in the Altamont Enterprise, so I would say Lansing probably wrote that. The shelter is the first in this series that's going to be connected with this long path trail that, or not really a trail, but the long path. And here's, right now, there is a Long Path North hiking club. So that long path idea actually came to fruition. And now there's a guide to the long path. I mean, again, I don't think it's not always a trail, but it kind of gives you destinations along the way. Part of it's a trail. They use trails when it's convenient, but there's a lot of places where there's no trail. And you can see it kind of wanders around. It's supposed to be an adventure, I think, when you take the long path. So anyway, the other thing, I mean, some of the other things, there's a lot written about, what the hiking club did there. This is a nature trail that's being laid out by Vincent Schaefer and Bill Glusing. And, that was one of the features. I never heard what happened to the nature trail. I don't know if it's there. I don't think it's there. The other thing, which is probably the most lasting tradition of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, was to have breakfast. Thanksgiving morning, they would have breakfast at the lean-to. And I just picked a couple of years here, 1932, 1966. But having breakfast on Thanksgiving morning, you come up there to the lean-to, somebody's making pancakes, there's coffee, there's, sausages, whatever they were having. The Christmans, once they had started this bird and wildlife sanctuary with the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, they opened it up. I mean, it must have been open, I would guess, before, but there's no article, there's no little clippings like this that talk about communities, community groups going out to the Christmas Sanctuary. But if you can see, and now there's piles of them. So what happened was they essentially opened the farm and said, you're welcome to come out and take a walk and look at the falls. So Will had died in 1937. Catherine died in 1946. And I guess one of the things I thought was thinking about, this was a farm owned by people in Duanesburg. I mean, they did not have to, they could have turned this around and just sold it any time. There was nothing. They had, it was the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club said it was a wildlife sanctuary that they had established there. But the Christmans didn't have to let the this continue. And when Will died, Catherine could have said, listen, I don't want to have any more of you guys here because, I just don't want you to do it anymore. Or they could have said to the public, we don't want the church group coming out or the Boy Scouts coming out. They could have closed it. So it was not guaranteed that the Christman sanctuary was going to continue on and, be open to the public. So 1970, a singular event. And of course, one singular event in 1970, it was the first Earth Day. This was had been, I think, bubbling along, the idea that, clean water, clean air, solid waste problems, a lot of environmental problems kind of came to a head. And Earth Day was the, expression, I guess, of people's interest in what are we going to do to protect the environment. So that was a singular event. And I think it was an indication that attitudes were changing about things. Well, another singular event was they're trying to do Interstate 88. DOT had been building Interstate 88 from Binghamton, and they were getting up closer to Albany, and they were trying to figure out, okay, which route are we going to go? We're going to go to exit 25. And I don't know if how well you can see that, but that little dotted line is the expressway where they're thinking about going to hit exit 25, because the goal was to connect Binghamton and Albany, I think. But this also, as I said, it was the Earth Day. I mean, the mood of the country was changing. So when this road was announced, or they said, well, this is what we're going to do, and the engineers had already kind of mapped out some alternate routes, but it raised a lot of concerns. And all of a sudden, the newspapers are filled with these headlines. The planned road threatens the Bosenkill, because the routes that they were thinking about, most of them kind of went right down the Bosenkill Valley, and that would have gone right through Christman. And, the Bosenkill is pretty scenic. So even though there's not a lot of people there, and maybe DOT, when they're trying to figure out, okay, which way do we put this road, was thinking, well, there's not a lot of houses there, so that would be, less controversial. Well, it turned out to be very controversial. And Chalmont High Auditorium, which I think I've been in once, but to fit 1,000 people in there and in a standing room only to get comments back from the public, I mean, DOT must have been blown away with the opposition to this. And of course, Lansing is one of the speakers. Lansing is in the news business, and Lansing writes books, and he's a naturalist, and he is not happy. And you can see, this was a map that showed some of the different alternate routes, and you can see Christmas Sanctuary is right kind of in the middle. So Lansing said at that meeting, that 1,000 people in the auditorium, that we can no longer look on slabs of concrete and ribbons of macadam as fingers of progress when those slabs and ribbons slash and wind through our natural areas, bleeding them of the very qualities that sustain life in man. So, another singular event. Lo and behold, National Register lists the Christman Sanctuary as a national historic site. I think that's it. And the Nature Conservancy, a conservation group that gets land. Lansing Christman sells the most of the farm to the Nature Conservancy. So they take over that property. And that really changes, to me, the future, because once Nature Conservancy has it, it's not a question of, well, what's going to happen when the next owner passes away or something happens. Are they going to sell it? Is it going to be closed? Whatever. It's not going to happen now, because Nature Conservancy is more or less a permanent, going to keep it permanently open. And the outcome is that the governor gets involved with the location of where this highway is going to go. And one of the options that they figured out was, well, rather than go to 25, why don't we create 25A? So that's what happened. They made DOT made a new exit on the thruway so that they didn't have to go down through the boat. But all that controversy is when I saw that one, I was thinking, now that shows you how hot this was. 176 people showed up for Thanksgiving morning for those pancakes. That's a lot of people. And they said they made 1,200 pancakes and 800 sausages. So it just shows you how much public support there was. And it makes you think about, okay, then let's think back now, how did this really happen? And I think there's all these pieces came together. It's a team effort. First of all, you got what saved it, and when I say saved it, I mean what got it to Nature Conservancy. The Christmans, Will, Catherine, Lansing, all were supportive. Vincent Schaefer, who inspired and led the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, the members themselves of the club, the threat that was posed by Interstate 88 that was kind of pushed it over the edge, because before that it was privately owned and it might have stayed in private ownership depending on what Lansing wanted to do. But that pushed it over the edge, and then the public support, of course, that was key. That all these people in this area were very concerned about the future and pushed the political leaders to do something other than go through the Boson Kill. So, key decisions were allowing the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club to develop that sanctuary. Because if the Christmans said no, I don't know if we would have heard about the Christman Sanctuary, because I don't know that they would have called it a Christman Sanctuary. It was the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, I think, who came up with that. The Christmans permitted public use. And that was key, because now all these people had the experience of walking that trail and going to the waterfall and seeing it. And then 10 years later, when they heard, DOT is going to put a highway through there, they were ready to write letters and do whatever. And then finally, when Lansing decided to sell it to Nature Conservancy, that more or less guaranteed that it was going to be saved. So I have an epilogue, too, just to let you know that even though it's been, 50, Nature Conservancy bought it in 1970, so it's 52 years that it's been Nature Conservancy. But the spirit lives on. Henry Plant, I met Henry a couple of times, but he was someone he's the next generation kind of in Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. He and his wife were both members, and they were involved in that effort to save the Boson Kill from the highway. And then afterward, he became the sanctuary steward for 40 years. He would have been a volunteer, watching, going out there, checking the trails. And he left, when he passed away, he left a generous endowment for the maintenance of the sanctuary. And you can see, if you go out there and do that hike, the bridge here that's close to the entrance, he's got that, his endowment paid for the bridge. And there's another plaque on the way to the falls in memory of his wife. And this is his daughter, Suzette. Suzette, about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, Suzette lives in France, by the way. Suzette came home from France to, I don't know if it was the only thing that she was doing, but she got word that the lean-to roof needed to be replaced. Suzette's involved with the endowment her father left for the Nature Conservancy. So she came over and she's out there pulling boards off the roof, getting ready for the new roof. And here's the roofing crew. Paul Gallery, who's with the Nature Conservancy. Suzette Tanis Plant, who's Henry's daughter, and John Rack, who represents the historical system. No, I'm just teasing. But John is a member of the Historical Society, and he's a longtime member of Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. And I think John was the one who raised the alarm about the roof and the fact that it needed to be replaced. Or at least that's what Suzette wrote me. The other thing is, the spirit of the sanctuary. Thanksgiving breakfast 2021, and I did not see this, even though I do go over there occasionally, but there was a sign here that said, Mohawk Valley Hiking Club 92nd Annual Pancake Breakfast if you're a hiking enthusiast, you're welcome. And I was thinking, I missed those pancakes. I could have gone over there. But they were having the 92nd annual pancake breakfast last year, less than a year ago. And here's the crew that put that on. James Schaefer and his family. Now, does that name Schaefer, it sounds familiar because Vincent Schaefer is his father, or was his father. Vincent passed away in 93. And James, so James is his son, Vincent's son, and those are his grandson and his granddaughter. And they were the ones who cooked the pancakes last fall. So I guess the spirit of the Christman Sanctuary continues. And these are extraordinary people: Lansing, Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, Will Christman, Catherine Christman, and Vincent Schaefer. And this is a couple of lines from Will Christman's poem. I give, bequeath, devote, devise, shelter to every bird that flies, harbor to all that walk or creep, to the red fox a bed for sleep, table and roof for every guest, and place for dove and thrush to nest. So that's the story of the Christman Sanctuary. Any questions or? Yes?
On one of the slides there, Mr. Wiedemann, you had people, it was before the Rockefeller slide, a few before that, there was a headline that said, Langley fights for preserve. Is that Walter Langley?
That's an answer that I can't give you.
Oh, okay.
I think it could be a senator. I mean,
Well, Walter Langley was a very, very highly regarded senator,
Yes.
and the Davidson politicians were really respected and loved.
yes. Well, I think that's who it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was really, really loved. I remember my father calling his widow on the phone and crying.
Yeah.
Walter had died.
Yeah.
I never even met the man, but just his reputation.
Yes. Well, he was one of the supporters of that. I mean, that's why DOT changed their mind, because I can think of a lot of examples before that. It was pretty much the engineers decided where the road was going to go, and tough. If you didn't like it, it pretty much was going to happen that way, because their goal was to make the most cost-effective solution to get traffic from point A to point B. And if it went through the middle of Syracuse or Albany or wherever, they just did it. And this one was one of the ones that, as I showed, it took the governor to change it. So, but it was also a time when the mood of the country or the people was changing, and people were not going to accept it. Like Lansing said, these fingers of macadam that are destroying our environment.
Jim Schaefer here.
Yeah.
Good to see you. So listen, I wanted to point out, first of all, you did a fantastic job. That's a beautiful piece of work. Detailed, historically correct, in every respect. One exception, those are my son and daughter, not my grandkids. But we're all cooks, and we hold the annual event every year. And my wife and daughter and son and I do the breakfast every morning, or every Thanksgiving morning.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
please come. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is I think we can recognize that the effort of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, Paul Schaefer, my dad, and the family members, and the club, and a kind of hidden guy in the background by the name of John Apperson, who was a GE engineer, were beginning the process of preserving the wilderness. This Christman Sanctuary was their first major project. And it led to my Uncle Paul befriending and working with John Apperson on defeating the Hewitt Amendment, the Cabot Amendment, all the other things. And there are pamphlets written by the club that talk about the different aspects of preserving the wilderness. And the long path, which I can tell you a little bit more about because I'm working on it right now, all of the work that ultimately led to the preservation of the Forever Wild Clause from the 1892 Constitution started at the Christman Sanctuary work. I truly believe that. And there are a group of us that are putting together a complete story of this. It's called First Wilderness. And the Christman Sanctuary story, some of your stuff, in fact, is getting melded into the rest of our work. So keep going. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Is the house by the railroad tracks, was that the Christman homestead?
Well, there's two houses, but that
As you're
it
coming-
dates from it's like I think it's about 1865 house. It's white. It's got the barns behind
Yes.
it. That's the Christman. That's the what they call the Williams Hollow Farm.
And who lives there now?
Joe Christman.
Oh,
So it's still
the
in the
Christman family.
Yeah.
good.
Yep, I stopped by to take a picture of the cairn of stones, you know, and he was out mowing, and I said, I'm going to put on a program, and I wonder if you let me get a close-up. And come on over, take a picture. So, still Christmas. Did I embarrass John too much for a picture on the roof?
Thank you.
Oh,
On
I
the
know.
end of the aisle.
Yes.
On a lighter note, you mentioned the 7,000 trees that were planted.
Yeah.
In my youth, the first half of the 50s, I was involved with a 4-H/county agriculture department program to take very borderline farmland out of production, plant with trees, reforestation.
Yep.
And the rule of thumb then was 1,000 trees per acre.
That's right.
So in ballpark figures, your 7,000 trees,
7
given
acres.
relatively open land and that sort of thing, you would have got 7 acres. 7,000 sounds like a whole lot of trees, and it's not.
Right.
Right?
A lot of work, though.
Yeah, that's true.
So would these have been saplings that you?
Yes.
Sir, would these have been saplings?
Yeah, there was, at that time, maybe a foot tall, probably not.
You mentioned Bill Gleason with Vincent Schaefer, and they worked together in the research. Bill Gleason lived up in the southwest corner of Duanesburg.
Oh.
But where his place is where Bill Reisberg lives now. It's that farm there.
Darby Hill.
He was the Galpa Road. He ran the House of Magic, GE.
Well, he was active in the
Yeah.
Mohawk Valley Hiking Club,
Yeah.
because he's in a lot of those articles. Yeah.
Just a little sidelight. I used to live on Schoharie Turnpike, maybe a half mile from the Christman farm. So east, if you're on the Bosenkill Creek, probably a third of a mile is 100-foot falls,
Yeah.
which is all posted, and I know a lot of people probably don't even know it's there.
Yeah.
But when I was a little kid, and the forest kids and I used to go down there and play.
Yeah.
We were probably 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, that falls, I mean, well, there's so many different angles you could, I got into that, I'm thinking, what? Oh, the 100-foot falls. And if you go back far enough in the papers, you see, oh, people used to go there and have picnics in the 1890,
It's like a
1880.
path used to go down to the bottom.
Yeah.
And that's
But,
probably where they
and
entered.
that's what the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club, I'm sure, when they start in Altamont, they're going to go see that falls. But then they keep going and go to Christmans and go, because the ravine is very beautiful. So anyway, there's a big falls there, but because it's posted, no one's allowed there, nobody knows about it. So if you think about, if that had happened at the Christmans, when 88 is going to put the highway through, maybe nobody would have said anything because they wouldn't have known.
And I lived even closer to that. And one of the reasons why the 100-foot falls wasn't open to the public is because it was so dangerous. The high side is right off the road. And of course my father had forbidden us to walk down there. We lived just a little ways up on the turnpike, and I spent a lot of time with the Christmans. But the one day I decided that I wanted to see that for myself, I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and that section of the Bosenkill was very lightly traveled, if at all. But while I was walking back from my excursion, my father drove down the road and caught me. And he let me continue to walk home. All he said was, we'll see you at home. And when I got home, he said, I'll bet you've thought of worse punishments than I could give you, so that was enough. But it was dangerous. They didn't publicize it particularly because of that.
Yes.
I was just going to add a minor note to history because I was thoroughly happy, we all were, that they changed the route so it didn't go through the Bosenkill. But when they did that, it went through my parents' house. On Route 7.
Yeah. Yes.
Carl, I'm delighted that you mentioned Henry Plant's role in the Bosenkill, because I knew him as a planner when I worked at Schenectady County Planning, and he was really active as an advocate and volunteered. He had retired from the campaign, and he was involved with the Schenectady County Environmental Advisory Council.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I met him a couple of times, and he was always. It was always about trails, or he was out and about doing things in conservation and recreation. Yeah.
Were all the 9 children of WW behind this, or was there some family discussion about whether they should continue with the preserve or not?
That's one of those questions that I can't answer because Lansing is the youngest. Lansing stayed there. Lansing was very into it. I mean, into conservation and loved the farm.
I thought maybe he was the oldest. I forgot the
Yeah, he's
seemed to be.
He's the last. He's the youngest, and he wrote at least 3 nature type books.
Yeah.
And anyway, But the other Christmans, live around here, or at least that generation did. I didn't read any controversy over it. I'm not sure exactly how all that happened because it just, Will died in 1937 and Catherine died in 1949, and then I think Lansing inherited it, or maybe he bought it. I'm not sure.
No. Lansing was the sole owner when they donated that to the Conservancy.
That's right.
He probably talked to, I don't know how many, if any, of his brothers were still alive at that time, but he had the full authority to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.